Hey, I just want to thank you today for joining us online for another installment of what I believe has just been a fantastic, outstanding series for us from the Old Testament book of Proverbs called The Way of the Wise. And I know some of you are joining us for the first time, but for those of you who have been tracking with this series week after week after week, and especially those of you who have been reading the Proverbs and sharing certain Proverbs with other people, I just want to thank you and honor you for your consistency in traveling through this journey of Proverbs together. And so what I want to do today is I want to begin by taking you to a place in Northern California. My wife, Chris, her family much of them live in Northern California. And so we get out there from time to time. And in early March, we were on the interstate and we were driving past a town, and the town is called Lodi, California. And Lodi, California has tens of thousands of acres of vineyards, and it's just right off the freeway. So here's a picture of one of the vineyards in Lodi. And there's just something about a vineyard that is well kept that I'm just infatuated with. And I'm not sure what it is. It might be the gnarled vines. It might be the symmetry, all of the vines planted a certain mathematical space apart and the rows evenly divided. So it might be the symmetry of a vineyard. It might be the fact that grapes tend to grow best in rolling hillsides, kind of undulating ground. And so often it's not just a flat field, but there's movement and rolling hills. But for one reason or another, there's just something about a vineyard that kind of goes, take my picture. So I don't know if you love being in and around vineyards, but I just find them beautiful and fascinating. And I am just so grateful that they grow like they do automatically. Well, actually, we suspect that if there is a beautiful, well-kept, productive, fruitful vineyard, someone was probably out there doing some work, and not just a little work. There's planting, there's pruning, there's weeding in order for a vineyard to produce the crop that it's supposed to produce. Now, in our conversation from Proverbs, The Way of the Wise, today we hit like a 5-verse stretch. It's observation, it's like autobiographical. And the writer has walked past a vineyard and he stopped, and it's like he's taken notes on what he sees. But the vineyard that he passes isn't a beautiful, well-kept vineyard. The vineyard that he passes it's a neglected vineyard. And so you would find this in your Bible in Proverbs chapter 24. And so let me read just one of the verses that describes the vineyard here. It just says, thorns had come up everywhere. The ground was covered with weeds, and the stone wall was in ruins. Thorns had come up everywhere. The ground is covered with weeds, and this stone wall that had been laboriously built in order to be a protective wall, the wall had come down and it was in ruins. What the guy witnesses here is not a beautiful, well-kept vineyard. He witnesses a neglected vineyard. Now, last week, we talked about something called ant power. And the conversation last week, ant power, is really a conversation about the power of slow and steady progress, making progress in a single direction by taking 100 steps in the right direction. Ant power, the power of slow and steady progress. But this tale of the neglected vineyard isn't about the power of slow and steady progress. It's about the power of slow and steady neglect. What happens over time when a critical area of our life is neglected? Now, it is my hope as we talk about this today that many of you would be able to identify a critical, important, God honoring activity that somehow got neglected over time. And today could be the day that you go, my days of neglect are over. I'm going to begin today to reinvest in that important area. And it's also possible that as we have this conversation today, many of you are in the middle of a new direction. You've had a course correction. You were traveling one way and went, I am on the wrong path. And you turned around and now you're traveling in a healthier direction. And it is my encouragement as we talk about this neglected vineyard today, that for some of you, you just find it affirming, you find it honoring, you find it encouraging, and it just gives you the encouragement to keep traveling down the good path that you now find yourself on. And so we're going to look today at the story of this neglected vineyard. And like I asked last week I said, try to identify one habit, just kind of one habit to continue, one habit to revive, or one habit to begin. As we look at the flip side of ant power, not slow and steady progress, but slow and steady neglect, let me ask you to do the same thing this weekend. Perhaps there's one habit in your life and you go, man, we're going to continue that. We are going to stay the course. And perhaps you go, I used to have a habit and I lost it and it's time to get that one back. This is a habit to revive. And I know that many of you will just go, today's the day, today's the day. Today's the day to begin a new life-giving, life-altering, life-changing habit in your life as we look at this tale, this story of the neglected vineyard. And so the 5 verses we're going to look at really kind of shake out into 2 parts. The first part, the writer just says, okay, this is what I saw. This is the vineyard I saw, what I observed. And the second part is, and this is what I learned. So just kind of 2 scenes. Scene number 1 is just what he saw. Scene number 1, what he saw. And so Proverbs chapter 24, verse 30, we jump in this way. The guy writes, I went past the field of a sluggard, past the vineyard of someone who has no sense. Now, those of you that have been reading through the Proverbs know that this person, the sluggard, makes a fairly routine appearance in the book of Proverbs. The sluggard is the person who does not have lazy moments, but kind of a lifestyle of laziness. They have this gravitational pull toward the couch. They have a high resistance to doing the uncomfortable things that simply need to be done in life. And so the writer begins, listen, I went past the field of the sluggard. I went past the vineyard. There we go, the vineyard of a person who has no sense. And this is what he saw when he looked into the vineyard. It's the verse we looked at. Thorns had come up everywhere. The ground was covered with weeds, and the stone wall was in ruins. Thorns had come up everywhere. The ground absolutely weed infested, and this protective stone wall was totally in ruins. And we look at that from our culture, and we go, yeah, well, what's the big deal? I mean, so he's not going to get some grapes. We need to step out of our culture, and we need to step back into their culture. As this guy stopped by this vineyard and he looked in, weeds everywhere, thorns everywhere, the stone wall broken down, we just need to recognize that in their culture, a vineyard was something incredibly valuable. And so valuable, just think vineyard, valuable. See, here's the deal. We walk into a store. We got all kinds of beverage options. I mean, you can probably find 30 different varieties of sparkling water. Back in the day, in Israel, 1,000 years before the time of Jesus, you basically had 2 options. One was water from the well, and the other one was wine, often from grapes that you yourself grew. And so they had basically 2 options, well water and wine. And so wine was a valuable commodity in that culture. Also, a vineyard takes a long time to cultivate. I mean, we stick a tomato plant in the ground and 2-3 months later, we've got tomatoes. Not so with a vine. You plant a vine in the ground. Year 1, you get nothing. Year 2, maybe something, but not much. Year 3, year 4, year 5, maybe you begin to have something approaching a crop. And so when the writer here says, I went past the vineyard of this sluggard, this person who lacked motivation, weeds had grown up everywhere, this is a real valuable asset that is going to waste. It's like the weed-infested vineyard is a symptom of a weed-infested life. It's not just that the vineyard is going wasted, we get a sense that the life is going wasted. We get the feeling that it's not just a vineyard that is in ruins and a vineyard that is neglected, but a badly neglected life. As I've reflected on this passage, the tale of the neglected vineyard over the years, there is something that kind of catches me and stuns me every time. And it's this. The dude who owned the vineyard, he didn't plant these weeds. He didn't knock the wall down. All he had to do for the vineyard to fall into ruins was nothing. All he had to do was leave it alone. And the reason that catches me each time I interact with the tale of the neglected vineyard is it just reminds me once again that some of the most critical areas of my life, some of my most critical priorities, all I have to do to see them implode is nothing. A little secret. Chris and I have been married now for 36 plus years. I have discovered over time that all we have to do for our marriage to begin to spiral downward is nothing. It takes an extraordinary amount of energy and focus and time to invest in a healthy marriage. But left to its own, it just doesn't get better and better and better. For some of the most critical areas of my life to fall into neglect, all I have to do is nothing. I don't know about you, but that scares me a little bit. I have discovered something financially, that my financial world does not kind of automatically put itself in order. I mean, those critical areas of what am I spending, what am I saving, what am I giving? Over time, there is a gravitational pull for finances to get sloppy. And I have to intentionally go out and weed and put things in order if that is to be corrected. All I'm saying here is that some of the most critical areas of our life, if left alone, fall into disrepair and neglect. Can I talk to you just for a second about becoming a resentful, bitter person over time? What I want to suggest to you is that all you have to do to become a bitter, resentful, complaining person is let wounds take their natural course. Someone hurts you and your heart gets infected and unhealed wounds tend to fester. We might even want to keep a wound open and alive. Never are we more self-righteous than when we feel we have been wounded unjustly and we nurse that wound. Rather than pulling the weeds of resentment, we might actually go out and pour fertilizer on it to keep it alive. And it's just so interesting the way the Bible talks about bitterness. And some of you are already ahead of me here. You know that passage in, I think it's like Hebrews chapter 12. It just doesn't say bitterness. It says the root of bitterness. It's like bitterness sends down roots into my life to take hold and to take over. The root of bitterness from Hebrews chapter 12. Eugene Peterson wrote a paraphrase of the Bible. It was called The Message. He doesn't use the word the root of bitterness, but let me show you Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15 from The Message. Peterson writes this. He says, keep a sharp eye out for the what? For the weeds of bitter discontent. Keep a sharp eye out for the weeds of bitterness that go into your life. And then Peterson adds this. He says, a thistle or two gone to seed can ruin a whole garden in no time. A thistle or two gone to seed can wreck the entire garden. It's the root of bitterness. It sends down tentacles into my heart and life and must be weeded out. All I have to do to let the vineyard of my life be overtaken by complaint, resentment, and bitterness is let the weeds go. And Jesus wants something so different for me, so much higher for me. As our Lord Jesus is walking with his disciples, it's the night that he gets arrested. I think they might have been walking through a vineyard or by a vineyard. And Jesus begins talking to his closest friends, Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Nathanael, his closest disciples. Jesus begins to talk to them about the fruitfulness of their life. And this is what our Lord said to them, and I believe these words cascade through the centuries to his followers today. John chapter 15, Jesus would say this is to my Father's glory that you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. He said, do you realize how much it honors the God in whose image you are made? When you take care of the garden of your life, when you weed the vineyard, when you prune back the branches, this is to God's honor and my good that we bear much fruit, showing ourselves to be disciples of the Christ. And so this is what the guy saw. He's taking a stroll one day and he looks over and he says, I went past the vineyard of a sluggard, past the vineyard of this person who had like absolutely no sense. And it was like the weed-filled vineyard was a symptom of a weed-filled life. Weeds had come up everywhere. Thorns covered the ground. The stone wall was in ruins. And he said, I stopped and I thought about that and I thought about it and I thought about it. I mean, this is what we find in verse 32, where he says, I applied my heart to what I observed and learned a lesson from what I saw. It's as if this weed-infested vineyard was whispering to him, take my picture. Remember this. Take my picture. Hang me on your wall. Remember this as a symbol of a neglected vineyard and a neglected life. He said, I observed what I saw. I learned a lesson from what I saw. And then we go, okay, dude, what was the lesson? What was the lesson? And we move from scene one of the story, what he saw, to scene two of the story, what he learned. Just part two, scene two, what he learned. And in verse 33, he rolls into the learning from this neglected vineyard. He says, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. I love that. Doesn't that verse like call you toward a hammock? Oh, a little sleep, just a little sleep. Hit snooze one more time. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the arms to rest. It's almost like you get this gentle sway of a hammock. I don't know, those words right there. Oh, I need a nap, you know. But this is not about a moment of lazing. This is about a lifestyle of laziness, a lifestyle committed to avoiding hard things. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the arms to rest. And what's happening here is you get the gentle sway of the hammock. The guy tosses and turns in his bed. He hits snooze again. And meanwhile, it's like these weeds have grown another inch. Thorns have taken over another corner of the vineyard. The weeds and the thorns have begun to choke out any productivity and fruitfulness. And there will come a day where this guy will wake up and he will feel like he's been mugged. He will feel like he's been robbed. And this is how the section ends in verse 34, where he says, and poverty will come on you like a what? Like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. It's like you'll wake up one day and you'll realize that your crop is gone, and it will feel like you've been robbed at gunpoint. And just the contrast there is so strange. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. It's like it lulls us into sleep. And then suddenly, the guy feels like he's been robbed. He feels like he's been mugged. And what has captured me over the years about the contrast between a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the arms to rest, and then feeling mugged, is that you feel that the collapse happens, ready? All of a sudden. It doesn't, but it feels that way. All of a sudden, someone's threatening to move out. All of a sudden, my kids are going to middle school and I feel I barely know them. All of a sudden, the bills come due. All of a sudden, 40 years of smoking leads to a medical emergency. All of a sudden, the lies catch up. All of a sudden, I awaken to discover that complaint and envy and resentment have totally taken over my vineyard, have totally taken over my heart, have totally taken over my life. All of a sudden, what are these 5 verses doing in Proverbs chapter 24? What's this doing in your Bible? What does this have to do with the way of the wise? What he saw and what he learned. I went past the field of a sluggard, past the vineyard of someone who had no sense. Weeds had grown up everywhere. Thorns had covered the ground. The protective stone wall was in ruins. And I sat there and I looked at it and I thought and I observed and I learned a lesson from what I saw. What was the lesson? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the arms to rest, and poverty will overtake you like a storm. Scarcity like a thief, scarcity like an armed man. Neglect something for long enough and we awaken one day and go, all of a sudden, I'm in trouble. And I believe this is in Proverbs, the way of the wise, just to speak to the reader and just to go, don't let this be you. What this guy sees in this neglected vineyard is kind of like, don't neglect the garden of your life. Don't awaken one day and discover that slow and steady neglect have led to some really painful and heartbreaking consequences. Don't let this be you. Now, if the owner of this neglected vineyard, if he awakens one day and realizes that his life is collapsing around him, if now he goes, okay, the way of the wise, I need the way of the wise now. And if he yells out, wisdom, I need you to tell me what to do now. If he calls out to wisdom now, he is gonna discover that wisdom is not returning his phone call. Now, if this has been heavy so far, for a moment, it's about to get heavier. Because what I want to do is look back in Proverbs chapter 1, the very first chapter, where wisdom is seen as a woman Wisdom is personified as a woman calling out in the street saying, listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. But then there's this turning point where it goes, but if you neglect me for long enough and then try to call out for me, you're gonna call and I am not gonna pick up the phone. There's Proverbs chapter 1, verse 28. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 28. Then you will call to me, but I will not answer. You will look for me, but will not find me. What's up with that? Wisdom says, neglect me for long enough and then call out for me. I will not be returning your phone calls. What? That's rude. What's up with that? And what's up with that is this. That the way wisdom works, wisdom is built to help me take 100 steps in the right direction. That's what wisdom is designed to do, to help me take 100 steps in the right direction. But wisdom is not built to suddenly bail me out once I've taken 100 steps in the wrong direction. Wisdom is not built to work in a way that is quick fix. Wisdom is designed to help me take 100 steps in the right direction. It simply isn't designed to bail me out, to be a quick fix, to change my life in hours when I have a lifestyle of neglect in a certain area. The best I can hope for at that time is getting on a different path, a new path, a better path, and staying on that path for a really long period of time. What we're talking about here is just two words, just time and direction. Wisdom is designed to be active in my life by choosing a great path and staying on it, step after step after step. What we're talking about here as a remedy for neglect. No quick fix. Time and direction, direction and time, time and direction, direction and time. And some of you have experienced this. You know, you're driving down the road and you miss an exit. And maybe you realize, okay, that was the exit I needed. And now you're aware of something. You're aware that you're traveling in the wrong direction. Now, good news, maybe the next exit is a mile up. Maybe the next exit is 20 miles up. And so every mile that you continue to go, you know something, you're going in the wrong direction. And this is a mile that you have to retrace. And finally you get up to an exit, you take the exit, go over the overpass, and then you begin to retrace your steps and go back. This is what we're talking about here. We're talking about choosing a different direction, and when good habits take root, it just takes time. Here's the good news. Here's the good news for those of you that have recently selected a new life direction, integrating new habits into your life. This is the good news for those of you that feel like you're looking at the vineyard of your life and it's overtaken by weeds or bitterness or neglect. This is the good news. It's never too late to choose a new direction. Look at me. It's never too late to turn the car around and to choose a new direction in your life. I just want to end by where we began, with just that question about one habit. Today, looking at this tale, this story of the neglected vineyard, what the guy saw and what the guy learned. Can you reflect on one habit to continue, one habit to revive? I used to do that and need to start using it again. Or one habit to begin. This could be the most valuable thing that happens today. Just take a moment right now to think and say, that habit, man, we're going to continue that. That habit, I'm going to revive that. that habit, I'm going to begin that today. This is to my Father's glory, Jesus said, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. May you begin to care for the vineyard of your life today.